In at number 10, Hawkeye. When Hawkeye first appeared in Tales of Suspense issue 57 back in 1964, he was actually a villain of Iron Man's. After a handful of appearances though, he would go on to change his ways and join the Avengers, with pieces of his origin story coming together in following years. After both his parents died in a car accident, Clint and his brother Barney ran away from the orphanage they were sent to, only to join the Carson Carnival of Traveling Wonders. Here, Clint befriended the Swordsman, who, along with Trickshot, trained the young Clint to become a master archer. But when Clint discovered that the Swordsman was actually embezzling money from the carnival, he attempted to turn his mentor over to the police. But instead, Swordsman beat the crap out of him, leaving him for dead. His relationship with his brother and Trickshot went downhill from there too. And at number 9, Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones may be most prominently known for her role in The Defenders, but the character has been on the Avengers team in the past too. Her origin story takes place in New York City, having gone to the same high school as Peter Parker, who she secretly had a crush on. After her family goes on a trip to Disney World, and they're driving back home, their car ends up colliding with a military convoy carrying radioactive chemicals. Those are the chemicals that give her powers. Her family does not survive, and Jessica ends up in a coma for months. After she does come to, she's sent to an orphanage, and later adopted by the Jones family, who re-enroll her at her high school at Midtown High, where she's ostracized by her classmates, except for Peter. And at number 8, Spider-Man. Spider-Man's origin story is a well-known tale. Peter Parker is bitten by a radioactive spider, he gains impressive new abilities, and after his Uncle Ben is murdered, he learns that great power comes with great responsibility. It's tragic, but it's something that has long informed the actions of the web-slinger. While that's the most popular iteration of the tale, there is a key plot point that tends to be forgotten when it comes to Parker. He was molested as a child. Revealed in the 1984 issue 1 of Spider-Man and the Power Pack, we learn that Peter was sexually abused by an adult he trusted, someone he thought was a friend named Skip Westcott. He grooms Peter somewhat, showing him porn magazines, with Skip saying to Peter, "Let's conduct a little experiment of our own. Let's see if we can touch each other like the people in that magazine." Peter, who had saved a child in a similar circumstance in the issue, admits that when he's rehashing the tale that he was too frightened to leave, despite being vocal about not wanting Skip to touch him. Peter later admits when he's swinging through the streets of New York that confronting what happened to him made him realize that he was not responsible for what had happened, which is a pretty big darn deal. And at 7, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. When the Maximoff twins first hit the pages of Marvel Comics, it was 1964 in X-Men issue 4 as members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They were reluctant villains, but their origin dates back much further than that. Their mother, Magneto's wife Magda, had fled from him when she was pregnant, taking sanctuary at the High Evolutionary. Fearing that her children might be discovered, she flees, leaving them behind. When superhero Miss America gives birth to a stillborn child and dies, the midwife attending her tells the Wizard, Robert Frank, that Miss America gave birth to Wanda and Pietro, although he flees too in grief. The twins are then left in the care of 2 Romani citizens, Django and Mara Maximoff, who raise them. Their adoptive parents are then killed after Django steals bread to feed the family, and their village is set on fire. Wanda and Pietro flee. Later, when Wanda uses her abilities to save a child, an angry mob hunts the twins down until Magneto rescues them, recruiting them for the Brotherhood. And at number 6, Iron Man. While the MCU has adapted Tony Stark's origin story quite seamlessly into a contemporary context, back in the day, when the character first came out in Tales of Suspense issue 39 back in 1963, he was created as the quintessential capitalist. Tony is the son of a wealthy industrialist who becomes a weapons manufacturer, and ends up getting kidnapped in Vietnam by enemy forces after he's injured by a booby trap, causing shrapnel to get lodged into his chest, slowly moving towards his heart. He ends up working with a fellow prisoner, Ho Yinsen, to create a magnetic chest plate to keep the shrapnel from killing him, along with a suit of powered armor, which Stark then uses to escape. If you know anything about American history, you know that Vietnam was one of the most traumatic events to ever occur in both the US and Vietnamese history, and left both nations struggling with some major PTSD for years to come. While the MCU terrorists are arguably just as scary, there's something about Tony Stark being nearly fatally injured in the jungles of Vietnam that makes his initial origin story quite terrifying when you really think about it.
Number 5. Paste Pot Pete. Paste Pot Pete was introduced in the 1960s in Strange Tales Volume 1 issue 104. There he appears as a villain with a particularly powerful paste gun, which he uses to commit crimes by trapping those who get in his way in paste. His backstory was delved into in the 90s in Spider-Man Volume 1 issue 91, where we learned that Peter Petruski was a brilliant scientist who invented the polymer substance he uses in his device. Now going by the name of Trapster, it's revealed to us that Peter could have just patented the substance and made himself a fortune, but instead he turned to a life of crime, believing I guess that was the better option. I'm sorry, in what world is that the better option? He'd already done a good amount of work toward producing an invention that would make him money without becoming a criminal. I don't understand. Number 4. Rainbow Raider. This Flash villain was first introduced in Flash Volume 1, Issue 286. He is Roy G. Bigelow. I know, get ready. As a young boy, Roy always wanted to be an artist, but he was born colorblind. Although his technique was perfect, the fact that his choice of colors when it came to his paintings was atrocious meant that he could never be a painter. Sigh. But wait a minute. Can he just paint in black and white? No, apparently not. His father worked hard to build him Prisma goggles, which would give Roy the ability to see color, and on his deathbed, handed them over to his son, saying that they would be his compensation. Roy interpreted this to mean that he would be compensated for years of being mocked as a painter and robbed of the ability to actually pursue his career, by using the powers of the Prisma goggles to start a life of crime. His goal? To steal priceless works of art and zap them of color so that no one can enjoy them, even though you can totally just enjoy a black and white painting. He can also shoot colors at people to make them feel emotions. For example, blue makes you sad. 'Cause yeah, that's how color rays work, apparently. Number 3. White Rabbit. Lorna Dodson first appears in Marvel Team-Ups Volume 1, Issue 131, featuring a team-up between Spider-Man and Frogman that is kind of adorable. When she was a young girl, she was raised as a proper lady, and to escape her strict and boring upbringing, she turned to books. How appropriate, considering us readers often escape in our own way through reading comics. That's where the comparison and relatability might end with Dodson, though. She became obsessed with Alice in Wonderland throughout her childhood, and even in the lap of luxury, she was never quite happy. She was married off at a young age to a very old man who later died and left her a fortune. She could have done anything she wanted with this fortune, but the thing she wanted most was to become an Alice in Wonderland themed criminal. Yep. So that's why she became White Rabbit. Ultimately, she was just bored. Also, for someone who identifies as a bibliophile, she misquotes Plato, attributing the phrase, "if you want something done right, do it yourself," mistakenly to the ancient Greek philosopher, when it is often attributed as being a saying of Napoleon Bonaparte and the French playwright Charles-Guillaume Etienne. Maybe she didn't read their stuff, I don't know. Number 2. Film Freak. Burt Weston was a struggling actor who faked his death to try and gain some attention when he came back from the dead, and revealed that he'd survived. The only issue is that no one noticed he had died. Sad. No one in the public eye seemed to mourn him or care. As a result, Burt Weston stayed dead and Film Freak was born, a villain who quoted movies. Burt had always been obsessed with the villain roles, considering them meteor parts, so he decided to act out his fantasy of being a criminal by actually pursuing a life of crime. So, he can get some notoriety and possibly an award-winning film role, proving his abilities by adopting the mantles of famous movie villains like Norman Bates from Psycho. At least that was his original origin story. I don't make this stuff up. Number 1. Codpiece. This backstory is about, well, just what you think it's about. When Codpiece was a teenager in high school, he was turned down for a date because he was not big enough. The girl in school meant that he was not tall enough, of course, but he interpreted it in a different way. All throughout his life, he attributed all his failed romances to this one singular problem. What is a guy to do? Well, turn to a life of crime, I guess. He built himself a giant utility codpiece and attempted to use it to rob a bank in Doom Patrol Volume 2, Issue 70, but was stopped by Coagula, who dissolved his codpiece. No codmobile for him, I suppose. Thank you so much for watching, Nerd Squad. I hope some of the motivations on this list made you laugh a little. I love villains that have outlandish origins and motives. They are not only entertaining, but show us how something that may seem insignificant or small to an observer can mean the world to those who are personally encountering that perceived small experience.
Number 10. Jean Grey / Phoenix. So Phoenix is low on here because, well, Phoenix is an offshoot of Jean Grey, another persona for her, or at least it was initially. So when Jean became the Phoenix, and get ready for cliff notes here people, Jean Grey came into much more power at that point. This was because she was intended to be the first female cosmic hero. This was after her death as Marvel Girl. Fun fact, fans named the Phoenix Saga retroactively, so after it had come out. So when Jean came into these powers, they overwhelmed her, and she ended up becoming Dark Phoenix. And well, she killed billions. Some are generous and say millions. But this arc proved so popular, writers didn't want to let her go. So they wanted to bring Jean back, but also absolve her of, well, the murder. So there would be no moral dilemma for fans. Enter the Phoenix Force retcon. The Phoenix wasn't a persona or a name, but an actual force that had made a copy of Jean. The real body was in a cocoon under the ocean, and she hadn't killed anyone. So you can have your cake and eat it too. The Phoenix Force would go on to become a big player in the Marvel Universe. This is a beloved retcon by many, and one so old and ingrained some don't even know it happened. Well, I do. We have a Phoenix now, because Jean killed too many people, hence the Phoenix origin changed. Number 9. Hal Jordan cannot feel fear. So Hal Jordan, the second Green Lantern, given a ring by a dying alien, Abin Sur, known for his ability to overcome great fear. However, this wasn't always the case, or rather it was and then it wasn't. There was a time when it was made canon that Hal Jordan could not feel fear, like he literally couldn't. He was incapable of it, because, and here comes the retcon, his ring removed the ability from his mind when it came to him, and he felt fear because, well, alien abduction. So the ring fixed that for him. It's also here that's revealed that Hal only got picked because he was closest, well, closer than Guy Gardner anyway. So for a time, this was canon, but then people got to thinking, isn't him not being able to feel fear kind of dangerous? Also, the ring is brainwashing people. Also, back to, doesn't that mean Hal could fly off the deep end? Which he did anyway. So we went back to the ring chose him because he had the ability to overcome great fear, not that it brainwashed him. Still better than I don't know what will is. I'll never forgive Heroes in Crisis for that. His ring literally would not work. Number 8. Demons killed Frank's family. The Tale of the Punisher is a classic. His family is killed in the crossfire of a mob hit or directly murdered by them, and it sends Frank Castle off the deep end, and he's gonna punish everyone responsible, and more, as the Punisher. However, there was a time when it wasn't just the mob who killed Frank's family, but also demons. We learned this in the 1990 miniseries Purgatory. So in this story, Frank learned that his family was murdered by a demon who had taken human form as a mobster, who then killed Frank's family because he wanted Frank to be killing in his name, which he had been unknowingly for all those years. This meant that when he sought vengeance, the demon would get the souls of the evil people that Frank killed. Yeah, demons made him do it. It was not a change everyone could get behind. These days we're back to just a good old-fashioned murder. Demons running around as mobsters manipulating you. Scary stuff. Number 7. Wonder Woman, not made of clay, and so many other things. So Wonder Woman has a shifting origin, and really it's how much people can't leave it alone that's the scary thing. She's made of clay. Let her be made of clay. But no, she's born of Zeus. She's rescued and brought to the island. She lost her powers and had to learn Kung Fu. That's not an origin, but it is probably the scariest time for Wonder Woman. The white Kung Fu suit. She had that suit, she was fighting Egg Fu, which was as awful as it sounds. This was largely because Black Widow was so successful, and Wonder Woman was a little stagnant, so DC was like, why not make her a ninja style fighter? Why not? That was why not. Most people like to forget this happened, but we still mess with the clay origin as recently as the New 52. People just keep messing with it. Leave it alone. Which is your favorite origin for her? Share down below. Number 6. The government put Cap on ice. So yeah, this was a thing. Instead of Cap being frozen in heroic sacrifice thawed years later, the government did it on purpose to put him out of commission, because they felt he would object to what they felt they had to do to end World War II. So Captain America as a comic series was relaunched a little after 9/11, and well, you can tell, it shows very much so in this storyline. Now Captain America had never been frozen on ice randomly until Namor found him. No, now he was in suspended animation in a lab, and then Namor found him. I like that Namor finds him either way. It's the golden age bromance bond. So pretty much nobody acknowledges this as a thing. This is very much an of its time type of occurrence, meant to echo certain thoughts that were being bandied about at the time and still are today. But we're back to classic Ice Cap, the origin where he's found on ice randomly. Secret conspiracy? Scary. We know what happens when we get too far with Cap. Hail Hydra.
Let's move on to another iconic DC character in at number 5. Catwoman. Oh yes, an iconic character the caliber of Catwoman can be victimized by a terribly wacky origin story just like any other hero. Selina Kyle first hit the scene in the early days of the Golden Age, appearing in Batman issue 1 from 1940, but she hadn't fully come into her own yet. During her debut, she was merely an expert thief who made use of disguises that made her appear like an innocent elderly woman. But how did she enter this glamorous life of crime and jewel thievery? Well, once upon a time, she was a flight attendant, and during one fateful flight, the plane she was working on crashed. She suffered from amnesia as a result, and upon waking, what did she do? She decided that she should start a life of crime. That's a completely rational idea, right? Yeah. Let's just be criminals. As for the whole cat part of her persona, she chose to adopt the mantle of the cat. She wouldn't be called Catwoman until later on, all due to her daddy dearest having owned a pet store in the past. As you can imagine, DC being the king of reboots and retcons eventually retconned this origin and replaced it with a brand new one in the 1980s after the character had made a comeback in the Silver Age. In our number 4 spot, Shauna the She-Devil. Shauna first appeared in a self-titled comic book in 1972. She is a well-trained veterinarian, an Olympic-level athlete, experienced in combat, and has extraordinary agility. She's also a highly sexually objectified character, but that is not why she landed on this list. Shauna witnessed the death of her mother. Her father murdered her mother. Yikes. She then moved from her home in Africa and came to the US to become an Olympic level athlete and a vet who specialized in raising leopard cubs. Here's where it gets really random. One of the cubs that she was raising was shot at by a zoo guard, and feeling the need to protect wildlife better, she moved back to Africa to fight poachers. That's it. It's kind of boring. Cool story. I can tell it again if you'd like. Coming in our number 3 spot, we have Bouncing Boy. Oh, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is by far one of the silliest superheroes out there. He is a boy who has the power to inflate like a giant ball, and of course, bounce around. It also gives him a certain extent of invulnerability, to be fair. He first appeared in Action Comics issue 276 in 1961, and he was a part of the Legion of Superheroes. Bouncing Boy, aka Chuck Tane, is largely thought to be a character created by Jerry Siegel as a means of reflecting Siegel's interest in comedy and a desire to have a vehicle for humor on that team. So how did Chuck get his powers? Well, he was not born with them. And silly enough, he is the second individual on our list to gain powers from a beverage. No word of a lie, Chuck thought he was gulping down a delicious soda when in fact he had just consumed a super plastic formula, whatever that is. He was first rejected by the Legion, but after defeating a robber, he was accepted onto the team's roster and became the Legion's self-appointed, I quote, morale officer. Morale officer? I mean, like, morale, like, inspirer would make sense, but to be an officer is kind of seems like he's bouncing around being like, be happy, you know? Moving on to something even more ridiculous, in at number 2, Firebrand. The Firebrand mantle has been held by 2 individuals, siblings Rod and Danette Riley. Rod Riley was a bored, wealthy socialite who decided he would fight crime alongside his manservant, donning a very flamboyant costume that consisted of a transparent shirt and tight red pants. Now, aside from being a bit of a latent queer superhero, Rod was pretty damn racist. His story had eventually been retconned, making him present at Pearl Harbor during its attack in World War II. So I guess it's justified racism? Ew. No thanks. Danette, after finding out her brother was Firebrand, would state, I quote, "What a confirmed bachelor playboy like my brother needed with a bodyguard, I never understood." And even better, from the looks of these clothes, I didn't know my brother quite well as I thought I did. In other words, sweetie, your brother's gay. Speaking of, her origin was a bit more absurd than her brother's. She was studying volcanoes north of Hawaii in the 40s when she was kidnapped by a sorcerer named Wotan. When she tried to escape, Wotan hit her with a magical blast that knocked her into a pit of lava, which then gave her the power to control heat and shoot fire blasts. Which, you know, seems a little absurd because if one was to be thrown into a pit of lava, you would die pretty quickly. Wouldn't be fun. But there is magic involved, so it's fine. And finally, in our number 1 spot, The Whizzer. The Whizzer, aka Robert Frank, is the product of the Golden Age, having initially been published by Marvel's predecessor, Timely Comics. First debuting in US Comics issue 1 in 1941, The Whizzer not only has a silly name, his origin story is almost baffling. It's that bad. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, Robert Frank was a fellow who went on a trip to Africa with his father. That was where he was bitten by a cobra. An almost fatal bite, his father saved him at the last minute with a blood transfusion from a mongoose. Why? Apparently to counteract the poison. But because of this, Robert was given super speed abilities. Later on, writers tried to make more sense of this by saying that the mongoose blood actually triggered latent metahuman abilities. Yeah. Sure, right. That makes way more sense. Totally. And that's why he fell into obscurity. Starting us off in at number 10, Hit Girl.
But it's really no more painful than a punch in the chest.
Why are you getting punched in the chest?
You're gonna be fine, baby doll.
Hit Girl has always been a controversial character, especially after the live-action Kick-Ass film came out. She brings up a lot of ethical debates about the concept of child superheroes, and she is a superhero who makes use of a whole lot of violence. The character first appeared in issue 3 of the Kick-Ass comic book series as a 10-year-old assassin who works alongside her vigilante father, Big Daddy. He's trained her since she was born. The two of them are out to seek revenge for Hit Girl's mother's death caused by the mob. Or, at least, that is what Hit Girl thought they were doing. Turns out, that was a lie. Big Daddy actually kidnapped Hit Girl when she was a baby, manipulated her into hating the mob, and also Democrats, lols, and there was never a mother in the picture. Big Daddy was just a comic book nerd living out a fantasy of fighting crime. This origin story was skimmed over as far as the film adaptations were concerned. Wonder why? In at number 9, The Hulk. Did you know that Bruce Banner's problems with rage sprout from child abuse? The Hulk's origin story is one that many people are familiar with. Bruce Banner was exposed to gamma radiation while trying to save an innocent kid, turning him into the Hulk uncontrollably whenever he got mad. But there's more to his origin than that. Revealed in a 1985 issue of The Incredible Hulk, fans learned that Bruce was abused as a child by his father, who was a violent alcoholic. His father would beat him and accidentally killed Bruce's mother too. Bruce's dad was afraid of his son because of how intelligent he was, even when Bruce was just an infant. In addition to that, after receiving psychiatric treatment in 1991, he would become Professor Hulk, a way more controlled, mellowed version of himself. He even wore full-blown outfits. This did not last long though. Apparently Professor Hulk was just an aspect of Banner's personality, and he wasn't fully cured after all, returning to his angry self eventually. In at number 8, Big Bertha. Eating disorders are no laughing matter, but apparently when Big Bertha was conceived in 1998 and introduced in West Coast Avengers Volume 2 issue 46, their creator John Byrne didn't have tact in mind. Big Bertha, aka Ashley Crawford, is a character who can control her body mass and the distribution of fat on her body. When she grows large, something that she did to gain membership on the Great Lakes Avengers team, she's Big Bertha, capable of lifting incredible amounts of weight. But when she's just doing her thing in day-to-day life, she's crafted a thinner body, turning herself into an actual supermodel. In order to return to her supermodel size, she throws up all of her excess weight. So yeah, that's bulimia, and that is a pretty thing to put in a comic, or at least in that light. In at number 7, Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner. You'd think with a hero as prominent as Green Lantern, DC would put a lot of effort into crafting an origin story for a new iteration of the character taking up the mantle, right? Wrong. Let's talk about Kyle's origin story. A very undeserved one, in which the character picked up the mantle from Hal Jordan, who'd been put through the rigor in leading up to 1994 with the Emerald Twilight story arc. Along came Kyle, a freelance graphic artist who randomly becomes a Green Lantern when he wanders out back of a heavy metal club to discover a Guardian dying there. The little blue dude starts speaking to Kyle, confuses the dude bro who thinks he's hallucinating. He's also wearing a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt, might I add. And he takes the ring, not even getting an explanation for what it really does. That's that. That's how he gets his ring. And at number 6, Harley Quinn. For a very long time, Harley Quinn was characterized by her abusive relationship with the Joker. As his devout follower and girlfriend, despite the affection often being unrequited, Harley Quinn used to be Harleen Quinzel, a psychiatrist who worked at Arkham and was manipulated so badly by the Joker that she lost her mind, became obsessed with him, and eventually allowed him to toss her into a vat full of acid to fully transform her into his lover and accomplice. In recent times, she's removed herself from the Joker, going on her own adventures as more of an anti-hero, and even developed a romantic relationship with her longtime pal Poison Ivy.
Number 5, Jessica Drew. I'm not sure how to describe Jessica Drew's origin story, which has also changed over the years, like most of our favorite Avengers and Marvel characters. Is her story scary? Yes. But is it also a strange combination of weird and tragic? Yes. Her original origins, when she first appeared in the comics in 1977, was that she was actually a spider who had turned into a human. However, the story of how she came to have her powers changed once Marvel realized that this idea might be too out there, even for their readers and even for the 70s. Instead, her story now follows that her dad was a geneticist who sort of accidentally but also kind of purposefully poisoned his daughter with uranium exposure. Their home was on a giant uranium deposit, and he thought that was fine. In order to save her, but also as a kind of weird experiment, he injected her with an arachnid serum, created based around his knowledge of the regenerative properties of spider blood. This worked, but due to the fact that it was a slow process, Jessica had to be kept in stasis during the healing time. By the time she was all better, she awoke from stasis as an adult woman, without really any experience in growing up. Not only is that freaky enough, but she also ends up discovering her newfound powers when she accidentally kills the first person she has a romance with. Oh yeah, she also gets brainwashed by Hydra. Poor Jess. Number 4, the Fantastic Four. I just realized I made them number 4. All 4 of the Fantastic Four have joined the Avengers at one point or another, unsurprisingly in my opinion, as the Fantastic Four seem to be the Marvel team to connect almost all Marvel teams, having some kind of relationship with almost every Marvel character. For their origin story, we have to flip way back in comic book history to the early 60s. A rocket ship's test flight goes awry when Reed Richards, Susan Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm are exposed to cosmic rays as they break through the Earth's atmosphere. These cosmic rays transform them into the Fantastic Four. When put that simply, it sounds fine and, kinda awesome. But as many of the film adaptations and Ben Grimm's suicidal moods have demonstrated, the Fantastic Four origins are definitely more horror story than Cinderella's story. Number 3. Wolverine. Another gruesome one for the books. Wolverine joined the Avengers team in the New Avengers series. Another X-Men as well, whose mutation was brought on by a traumatic experience. Maybe that's in part why Logan and Rogue have such an intense bond. Logan was the legitimate son of Elizabeth Howlett, who had an affair with his father, Thomas Logan, the groundskeeper of his mother and her husband's huge estate. Logan grew up being abused by his grandfather and also traumatized by his half-brother, who killed his puppy. He discovered he was a mutant after watching his biological father murder his mother's husband, who was kinda like a father to him, in cold blood. And of course, Wolverine's abilities involve claws which tear through his skin, so you can imagine just how terrifying that must have been. And that is just the beginning of his origins. Let me tell you, it does not get much better from there. Including, but not limited to, Logan being raised by wolves, only to have his wolf family murdered by a polar bear. Number 2. Deadpool. Lovable, violent, and tragic. Probably the 3 words that describe this anti-hero, and that's right, Avenger, the best. Wade Wilson is also known for being mentally ill and unstable, which means that his backstory has always been somewhat unclear, as it seems hard for him to remember it. Ryan Reynolds' first Deadpool film gave us a glimpse of his comic book origin story, and while some details were left out, the film followed the same trajectory. Namely, that he broke up with his girlfriend, also Vanessa in the comics, due to his uncurable cancer, and that he agreed to be tested on by Weapon X. As a result, he was granted healing powers, which eventually ended up leaving him scarred. Oh, and he also had a friend in the warehouse/hospital where they were kept. And there was even an Ajax, so not super far off, but still equally scary and upsetting. Number 1. Punisher. Obviously, I had to make Punisher my number 1. His origin story to me is the most tragic and terrifying. Why? Because imagine if you were in Frank Castle's shoes. The Punisher, aka Frank Castle, served in the military and during one of his times on leave ended up with his family in Central Park, where they stumbled upon mob dealings they were not meant to see. Fearing witnesses, the mobsters murdered Frank Castle, his 2 children, and his wife. Unfortunately, Frank managed to survive and was left with the loss of his family and a need for revenge that was denied him by the courts and police, as they were being controlled and corrupted by the very mafia that took out Frank's family. Castle decided to take matters into his own hands and adopted the mantle, the Punisher, swearing to get revenge for his family by any means necessary, making him a huge anti-hero similar to Deadpool, but much more serious. You can explore Castle's level of hurt and just how far Punisher is willing to go to fight for revenge in Netflix's Daredevil series and their Punisher series. He respectfully joins the Avengers ranks in the Savage Avengers series. Number 10. Plant Man. Granted, there are 2 different versions of Plant Man in Marvel Comics, but for our purpose, I would like to talk about Samuel Smithers, a man who worked for years with a botanist and was working on perfecting a plant ray that would allow him to increase the IQ of plants, which he believed to be capable of intelligence. Sure, why not? After the botanist he was studying under died, he moved to the US from the UK, but was unqualified in terms of his schooling to find a job where he could continue his research. Instead, he worked as a gardener, but instead of doing his job of tending to the plants and cutting the grass, he spent more time working on his invention, causing him to get fired. Fortunately, a bolt of lightning struck his device, and apparently that was all it needed to become fully functional. Smithers now realized that he could not only increase the plant's IQ, but command them with his ray. Does he want world domination to prove to the world his brilliance and terrorize them with his finished invention? Nope, he just wants to get revenge for getting fired. Even Paul, the new Plant Man's motivation for villainy, is pretty ridiculous. He turned to a life of crime so he could make more than minimum wage after being caught stealing variant covers in the comic book store where he worked. Pretty lame. Although some of those variant covers are really nice, so I kind of get it. Number 9. Sports Master. Lawrence Crusher Kroc was one of the worst sportsmen to play any sport, and he reportedly played them all. But he was also the dirtiest player around. He cheated in every sport and became barred from all of them. Infuriated, he decided to turn to a life of crime, despite the fact that he was still a trained athlete, so he could have become like a coach, possibly a fitness model, but no, crime was the only path for the Crusher. Oddly enough, in the comic where he was introduced, All American Comics Volume 1, Issue 85, Green Lantern is also keeping up with his career and sports apparently. Sure, why not? Sportsmaster's master plan is to set up a polo match, where they will put all of the audience to sleep and rob them, but Green Lantern attends and handily foils it. Oh yeah, did I mention he usually just fights with sports equipment? Number 8. Lenny Luthor. In the film Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, Lex has a nephew who helps him escape from his prison sentence while he's working on a road gang. His motivation in the film seems somewhat unclear, appearing to be a villain simply due to the fact that he is related to one without any specific reason for wanting to defeat Superman. Perhaps it is because Lex is the only one who will put up with him because he's super annoying, or he's just doing it for an inheritance? But just because you're related to a villain doesn't mean you have to become their villainous sidekick. I guess this is based around the old adage, like uncle, like nephew. That's an adage, right? Number 7. Yon-Rogg. In the MCU film Captain Marvel, Yon-Rogg is painted as a villain whose motive is to recover and preserve Kree technology that could be used in a war against the Skrulls. His comic book counterpart does not have such a patriotic motivation, unfortunately. Yon-Rogg is a colonel who admittedly is painted as a villain when we meet him in Marvel Superheroes Volume 1 Issue 12, when he orders Captain Marvel to go down to Earth's surface alone as the Kree spaceship arrives at planet Earth. This is apparently against all standard protocol, but this act, as well as all of his villainous acts, stems from the fact that he is jealous of the captain, who has love of the ship's lovely medic, Una. The crazy thing about this origin story and motivation is that this feud between Yon-Rogg and Marvel continues even after Una dies in the comic. At that point, Yon-Rogg just seems to hate Marvel just for, I guess, thwarting him? Number 6. Calendar Man. This Batman villain was first introduced in Detective Comics Volume 1 Issue 259. Where did he come from? Why did he commit the crimes he did? None of these questions are ever really fully answered in that comic, but it looks like he did it because he could? Later incarnations of the Calendar Man are presented as a man obsessed with the calendar and dates. In his original appearance, he was a traveling magician from India who was in town for 5 days and decided to challenge Batman, performing 5 crimes in the 5 days he was there to prove that Batman couldn't catch him. He almost got away with it too, but Batman noticed in the newspaper that there was an announcement about the magician's shows and that he would be there for 5 days. The same 5 days that the crimes seemed to be committed on. The clue he gave Batman was that he was basing his crimes on the 5 seasons. Being from India, the 5th season was supposed to be a reference to the monsoon or rainy season, which Batman and Robin took a really long time to figure out. The real mystery here is why a successful magician felt it necessary to goad Batman into capturing him and why he turned to a life of crime in the first place. Like, if you're a successful magician, maybe just stick with that.
And at number 5, Rocket Raccoon. Imagine a little raccoon running free, rummaging through trash cans and building a home in the forest. Now take those innocent beginnings and throw in an unknown, creepy, mad scientist into the mix. This is Rocket's tragic origins. Once a free animal doing his thing, he was kidnapped and experimented on. First they surgically attached cybernetic implants and then gave this innocent animal the mental capacity for not just self-awareness, but consciousness as well. Then, the newly armed and murderous raccoon became a violent space pirate known simply as just 89P1. Never a good start when your new name starts with numbers. Combined with the psychological effect this would have on his new identity, Rocket was also aware that he was the only one of his kind. Now he leads the lonely life of being possibly the universe's only talking raccoon. In at number 4, Spawn. Typically the rule of thumb when it comes to origins is that the more terrifying the hero, the more tragic their story must be. Spawn fits this formula to a T. Born Albert Francis Simmons, Al was a contract killer, and after being betrayed by his best friend, he was murdered on the job. Soon the once highly capable CIA operative is having his soul sent to the bowels of hell, and while there he strikes up a deal with a demon allowing him to return back to Earth. However, he never returned in the way that he left. Instead, he was a disfigured demonic entity known as Spawn. To make matters worse and beyond tragic, in the 5 years that he had been dead, his wife remarried. Although she didn't just marry anyone, she married the man that killed Al, while also letting this killer father a child? Needless to say, Spawn was more than a little bummed out about this, and not to mention this deal he struck up with his devil was really a ruse to further the demon's unholy war against all life. In at number 3, Batman. As sad as Superman's story was and the whole not knowing his parents thing, a much more tragic story would be knowing them, loving them, and losing them right before your eyes. This is Bruce Wayne's story for all of eternity. He must live with the recurring nightmare of watching his entire life be destroyed in a dark alleyway, something that would mentally break even the strongest of human beings. When a common street thug robbed the Waynes at gunpoint, they refused to give in to the criminal's demands, causing the man to shoot them both, leaving a young boy alone with his deceased parents in the dangerous streets of Gotham. This was a pivotal moment in Bruce's life and became the obsessive driving factor for really everything. He began training day after day, seeking to destroy the entire criminal underworld of Gotham that took his parents. In at number 2, Rorschach. Ranking near the top as one of the more tragic origin stories, we have Walter Kovacs. Born into a terrible home, his father was extremely abusive and his mother was a prostitute. Walter's parents never allowed him to truly experience the world. As such, his view was that the majority of life on Earth had evil intentions. His father would mercilessly beat him while also taking away any form of education in his life. Ironically, Walter was born as a very intelligent child who actually was excelling in his classes and had displayed interest in religious education. His father's violence beat any longing for knowledge out of him though, turning his life into a series of heinous crimes. For example, at just 10 years old, he shoved a lit cigarette into the eye of an older child who was bullying him, leaving the boy partially blinded and sending Walter to jail. This was the turning point where he became the homeless vigilante who wears a literal psychiatric experiment for a mask and goes by the name Rorschach. Last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Eric Draven. This makes our number 1 spot because the tragedy in this comic book stretches beyond the pages and into the author's real life. The character of Eric Draven in the story of The Crow is extremely dark and was the way for James O'Barr to channel his anger and pain of losing his fiancée to a drunk driver. In the story, Eric and his girlfriend Shelley are returning from a romantic vacation when their car breaks down on the side of the road. A gang notices and decides to capitalize on the couple's misfortune. After shooting Eric in the head, he's forced to watch them brutally beat and murder his girlfriend before he too finally dies. Soon Eric is resurrected from the dead, given the gift and curse of immortality while being guided by a supernatural crow. Eric then begins tracking down each of these thugs and makes them each suffer the same brutality that his girlfriend went through. So tragic. I think I might go cry into a pizza now.
Starting us off in at number 10, The Badger. Let's begin our list with one of the more obscure heroes to appear on our countdown today. We are talking Norbert Sykes, aka The Badger. Oh friends, it only gets worse from here. So our buddy Norbert is a Vietnam vet who was initially published by the very short-lived Capital Comics. His rights then went to a publisher called First Comics, and then after the 90s he was released by Dark Horse, Image, and IDW. So yeah, he's been around a lot. Wonder why. First appearing in a self-titled comic, Badger issue 1 in 1983, this is a character who is an expert martial artist. And, this is the best part, he can talk to animals. So, how did he get that power? Well, we should probably preface this by noting that he has multiple personality disorder, because one of his personalities believed he could talk to animals, and that personality referred to itself as the Badger. Oh, and it's also worth noting that this persona of his believed he saw God appear as a badger to him. Yeah, like I said, gets worse. Norbert escapes the mental asylum that he's in and becomes a vigilante based off of this. He's also got a ton of other personalities too, including a dog, a 9-year-old girl, a playboy, and an inner city black kid. So not only is this absurd, it's also a little bit offensive too. Now, it wasn't even the Silver Age, you guys. Well, actually, the more racially offensive age was the Golden Age. But. Up next, number 9, Defensor. The Defensor is another slightly obscure character, and he has a very obscure origin story to boot. Defensor first appeared in Marvel's Superhero Contest of Champions issue 1 in 1982. Before becoming a vigilante, he was a construction worker named Gabriel Carlo Dantes Sepulveda, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Gabriel found an underground passageway that he snuck into after his superiors at his job had gone home for the day. They had previously told him to ignore his discovery. Super stubborn though, he entered and found that the cavern contained a suit of vibranium armor connected to an unknown machine. So what did Gabriel do? Well, he put it on, of course. And as soon as he did, things went to hell. He was attacked by a group of creatures, and he fought his way back to the surface, and thus began his vigilante career. His death happened off-panel in 1995, being reported in Captain America issue 442, so clearly wasn't all that important. Makes sense why he's obscure. Coming in at our next spot at number 8, Elongated Man. Ralph Dibny may be a more respected B-tier superhero these days, but that is not something you'd assume based solely off of his origin story. How did he become a superhero? He drank soda. Not even kidding here. Dibny, a young regular dude who just so happened to be obsessed with circus performers, wanted to be like the contortionists and acrobats that he so dearly admired. So he did his research and asked around, and turns out the particular performers he questioned claimed that they drank a particular kind of carbonated beverage that helped them stay in top form. That soda was a drink called Gingold. So what does our pal Ralph do? Well, he went out and bought as much Gingold as he could get his non-powered hands on, and he drank it. A lot of it. Like an unsafe amount of it. And surprise surprise, it actually worked, but gave him more than he bargained for. He had gained stretchy powers capable of elongating his body in any which way. Now you're probably thinking this story has some obvious plot holes, right? Can anyone drink a bunch of pop and be granted superpowers? Definitely not. Really, he's lucky that he didn't gain a massive amount of cavities instead. And at number 7 we have Black Condor. There have been 3 Black Condors over the years, and all 3 haven't had great origin stories, but let's specifically look at the first, Richard Gray Jr. First appearing in Crack Comics issue 1 in 1940, Gray got his powers thanks to nuclear exposure from a radioactive meteor. Despite this, he personally believed that this wasn't actually the reason he had gotten powers. This is because he believed he was capable of flight because he had been raised as an orphan by a flock of wild condor birds in the wild. In the wilderness. Which, yes, is very, very dumb. When he did return to civilized society, he just happened upon the dead body of a senator named Thomas Wright. So he stole his identity because they shared an uncanny resemblance. How convenient. And yes, he led a double life as a senator while operating as a crime fighter. Yeah, you can see why this character has had so many different iterations. Although they never, quite got it right. Up next at 6, Green Arrow. Green Arrow's initial origin story is so bad because it's laughable. And that's because it is literally a ripoff of another one of DC's more popular characters, Batman. First appearing in More Fun Comics issue 73 from 1941, DC was clearly trying to capitalize on the success of their Caped Crusader Batman by creating a similar hero. This hero was Oliver Queen. Queen was an orphan. Queen had a traumatic experience that inspired him to fight crime. Queen was a millionaire philanthropist playboy. Queen had an arrow cave and an arrow car and even a young ward. Spot the difference yet? Well, apparently Queen found himself on a deserted island one day and taught himself how to be an expert archer. This is literally the only difference between him and Bruce Wayne when you put it out on paper. Like Batman, but more Robin Hood. Luckily, Queen had become a more independent character in terms of his identity later on, having had a major overhaul and a neat little retcon in the 60s that mixed up his ideologies, ditched his millionaire background, and turned him into a liberal man fighting for the people.
Number 5. Vision is the Human Torch. What? How could this be? Well, let me explain. Firstly, we're talking about the first Human Torch, Jim Hammond, not the second one, Johnny Storm. Vision is not Johnny Storm. Oh man, how many hoops would they have to jump through to make that work? I'd actually want to see that. So first origin, Vision is created by Ultron and sent after the Avengers. His brain patterns were taken from Wonder Man. Okay, cool. Vision believed this was his origin for years. He was sort of the spawn of Ultron, his good son as it were. But then, Avengers number 129, he was sent back in time to see his true origin, that he was created inside the mind-wiped body of the Human Torch, but Vision turned on his creator. Now I find this horrifying, I mean Jim! But this was the catalyst that let Vision think he was a hero and made him feel like he could marry Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, because he was good enough. So how did this retcon get undone? Well, because we have Jim back now and Namor and him are hanging out again, Golden Age bromance. Well, Kurt Busiek hated this marriage and sought to undo it and everything to do with it. So back to Ultron and a blank body, and the Human Torch is someone separate. Good, I feel terrible. Like I'm a body in somebody else's mind-wiped body. Icky. Number 4. Thor takes over a body. Speaking of just taking over a body, the original origin of Thor saw him inhabiting the body of Donald Blake. Not that that was his civilian human identity, but that Donald Blake was a person who became overwhelmed by Thor when he wielded the hammer. This was dropped pretty fast, and Blake became Thor's human guise. And he just for a time at the beginning didn't remember he was Thor until, you know, he got more worthy. This change was not done because it was scary, although possession via Norse god is terrifying. Instead it was because for some readers it was proving confusing, and it raised the question, why care about Donald Blake at all if he was in no way Thor? So, presto changeo. He's Donald and Thor, and not ruining some poor innocent man's life by making him a target in huge cosmic events he'll never fully comprehend. Number 3. Falcon, the brainwashed gangster. Captain America number 117 saw the introduction of Sam Wilson, and from the start fans loved him. He was just as patriotic as Steve and an affable, likable character. He was a social worker. However, in his next appearance, the Red Skull would say he was a brainwashed hoodlum named Snap Wilson, and that he had brainwashed him so that Cap would think he had found the perfect partner, but haha, oh snap, pun intended, he hadn't. The Falcon would break free of his sleeper agentness, but would be more snappy for a bit. This would be retcon and we would go back to the first origin eventually. Because, well, it's a little racist. Your first African American superhero in American comics, not African, that was Black Panther years earlier, but of American descent, and he starts off as a positive role model only to turn into a stereotypical hood. That's that's gonna be a big oof for me. All New Captain America #3 would say that this was a persona or alias that Sam used for cover. I like Sam. He's just nice. There aren't enough nice characters out there. They're not boring. Nice isn't boring. #2, an imp gave the Flash his powers. So the Flash, both Barry Allen and Wally West got their powers the same way, lab accident and lightning, which, well, it seems pretty improbable. So Flash number 167 to the rescue. Kinda, sorta, not really. This issue asked the question, did Mopey, an interdimensional imp who claimed he had given Barry his powers, actually do that? And for this issue the answer was yes. And now Barry had to pay for them. Yes, pay. So he had to work as the Flash, even though he already had a job as Barry Allen, to pay for the chemicals that spilled all over him, turning him into the Flash. So he did. And then he gave the imp his money. And we don't talk about this anymore. #1, Donna Troy. All of it. Donna Troy, where to begin? So she is the second Wonder Girl because the first Wonder Girl is Diana, and Donna was created by accident when the creative team from the Teen Titans saw Wonder Girl, a young Diana, who was hanging out with her adult self and thought she was a separate character and sidekick, so they put her on their team. This meant that Donna had to be created as a separate person, and because of this, all of her origins have been a mess for years. She had one simple one for a brief moment, but then it was undone. She has been erased from existence, recreated as a memory, saved by Diana, created as an evil simulacrum by a witch, and now she's infected. It's just a lot of a lot, and it's scary how they won't leave this alone. Just give her one, leave it alone. It's not perfect, but it's fine.
#10, Robbie Reyes, aka Ghost Rider. Making his first appearance in Marvel Comics in 2014, Robbie Reyes was introduced to us as the all-new Ghost Rider. His origin story is different and possibly more terrifying than that of his predecessor, Johnny Blaze, but maybe not as scary as that of other fellow Ghost Rider, Alejandro Jones. We are introduced to Robbie as he is struggling to improve his and his little brother Gabe's quality of life, working hard to get them out of the dangerous neighborhood of East LA that they live in. Robbie enters a street race in an attempt to win 50 grand and hopefully get them to a safer neighborhood for good. Unfortunately, the cops chase and corner Robbie when he accidentally turns down a dead end. Unbeknownst to Robbie, the stolen car he entered the race with is filled with drugs, which the cops are after. The officers gun him down and set the car and Robbie ablaze, leaving him to die. Fortunately, the car had a ghost, and this ghost bonds with Robbie, saving him and transforming him into, you guessed it, Ghost Rider. We later find out that the ghost belongs to someone Robbie once knew, making the story even more terrifying. In the spirit of avoiding spoilers, I'd encourage you to read the all-new Ghost Rider series to find out more. Robbie Reyes joins the Avengers in Avengers Volume 8. #9, Moondragon. Moondragon is the daughter of Drax the Destroyer. Sort of. I'm getting ahead of myself. Cue origin story. Heather Douglas, as she was once known, was the daughter of Arthur and Yvette Douglas. Heather's dad was in a band, and after a successful show in Las Vegas, the family was driving home when suddenly Thanos decided to visit Earth. Thanos observed the family but did not want any witnesses of his arrival, and so he killed them all. Fortunately, or maybe not so fortunately depending on how you view things, Mentor showed up. He pitied the family and offered Arthur the opportunity of being resurrected. Arthur accepted this offer based around his desire for vengeance, and so he and Heather were resurrected with this purpose in mind. Arthur became Drax and Heather became Moondragon. Moondragon adopted her name after training with monks on Titan and defeating a psychic entity called the Dragon of the Moon. Her power and a quest for vengeance has caused her to do some pretty terrible things, despite also leading her to join the Avengers team for a time, even being offered full membership during the lengthy but original run of the series in Volume 1, Issue 151. #8, Beast. Having a similar origin story to that of Bruce Banner, Beast was originally a scientist and gentle giant. Beast was born a mutant but was one of the lucky few who went unnoticed. Save for having a large stature, large hands and feet, and a superior intellect, he appeared normal. His scary origin story was a result of his own hubris. While studying mutant genetics at the Brand Corporation, he became worried that an envious colleague, Dr. Maddox, was attempting to steal his research and formula, based around the chemical cause of mutation. Yep. Hank had it all. Not only was he strong, smart, and sitting on a scientific breakthrough, but he had also found love at Brand Corp with Linda, his beautiful and brilliant lab assistant. However, in his pride, he attempted to protect his formula from being stolen by drinking it, causing him to change for what he estimated would be an hour. Unfortunately, the drink caused a Jekyll and Hyde type horror story where Hank would forever become both Jekyll and Hyde, struggling to hold on to his humanity, as both on the outside and occasionally on the inside he was stuck looking like and feeling like a beast. Number 7. Sunspot. When Roberto da Costa was 14, his superhero story began and his traumatic mutant transformation took place. During a school championship soccer match, Roberto was beaten on the field by members of the opposing team because of the color of his skin. What stops this blatant racism and assault? Surprisingly, not a referee. No, what stops the assault is Roberto's mutation. He turns into a dark ball of energy. Unaware of what is happening, he calls to his friends and teammates, but everyone is terrified of Roberto and flees. His girlfriend Juliana is one of the few who does not run away from him, but instead runs into his arms. However, even Juliana's love is not enough to save this horror story. The two are kidnapped and put with other young mutants. During an escape attempt, a scuffle ensues which results in Roberto being shot at. Juliana jumps in front of the bullets, lasers, and dies, sacrificing her life for his. Roberto adopts the mantle Sunspot and ends up joining the Avengers later on, even owning AIM at one point. Number 6. Rogue. You know I had to put Rogue on this list. I figure most of you know the tragic origin story of this Avenger and famous X-Men, but for those who don't, here we go. Rogue was a teenage runaway who eventually found her first love with a boy named Cody Robbins. Cody was also her first kiss, which, let's be honest, if we all remember our first kiss, I'm sure it was awkward enough, though not nearly as awkward or traumatic as it was for Rogue, I'm sure. Her first kiss was also when her mutant powers started to manifest themselves. Rogue's powers involve her absorbing life energy through touch, in case you didn't know. This meant that her first kiss and first victim, Cody, was left in a coma. Add that to the fact that she ended up being basically raised, used, and somewhat brainwashed by Mystique, and you've got one crazy origin story for our girl Rogue. She joins the Avengers in the Uncanny Avengers series, issue number 4.
Up next at 5, Gin Genie. Oh, Gin Genie. We've featured this more obscure superhero on several of our lists over the years, so longtime fans of our channel should not be surprised that she made it on this one. Created in 2001 and first appearing in X-Force issue 116, Gin Genie Becca Parker is an active superhero whose powers require alcohol in order to function. So she's always drunk, which you can imagine does complicate things in battle. She had pumped a mixture of different alcohols into her bloodstream, which somehow gave her powers that enabled her to create seismic waves, capable of leveling buildings. But her power does not work unless she's borderline blackout drunk. She also died in the same issue in which she appeared, so guess she wasn't that important after all. And at number 4, Jason Todd as the Red Hood. Created in 1983, Jason Todd was the second Robin, the replacement for Dick Grayson as Batman's ward. At first he was a strawberry blonde carbon copy of Dick, but after Crisis on Infinite Earths he got a revamp, becoming a morally ambiguous street kid who would disobey Batman and get into all sorts of trouble. He was so disliked that when DC decided to hold a phone poll that would determine his fate, some dude actually programmed his computer to call and vote a bunch of times in order to push the odds against Jason's favor. The storyline, 1988's A Death in the Family, saw Jason getting beaten to a pulp by the Joker with a crowbar. His death would cause great psychological damage to Bruce Wayne, and many comic book creators would eventually speak out about this, saying how it was a pretty terrible thing that DC would do that to a character. The way the phone poll was held and the story was handled was quite controversial. Fast forward to 2005, Jason Todd is resurrected. For years it was believed that he was one of the only 3 characters who would never be brought back from the dead, the other 2 being Uncle Ben and Bucky Barnes. But also the Winter Soldier then, is a thing now. At least Uncle Ben's still dead. His return was controversial. Many believed it was gimmicky, while others felt that it took away from the trauma that had really inspired some interesting characterizations in Batman since. And at number 3, Ebony White. Yep, it's a racial caricature. Ebony White was the sidekick of Will Eisner's The Spirit. Often portrayed as a young boy around the age of 12 years old, his age did fluctuate a lot. Towards the beginning of the strip, he was a taxi driver and sometimes the Spirit's personal driver. While we've never been given a full origin story, Ebony's first appearance was on June 2nd of 1940, driving a taxi, noted to be the Spirit's faithful young friend. His speech patterns are also harmful racist depictions of black people. Eisner made the way that he spoke similar to the way that the character Jim from Huckleberry Finn speaks, making him appear to be uneducated and trained to obey his white master. What's worse is how Eisner would later describe the character. I quote, "At the time, humor consisted in our society of bad English and physical difference in identity." So Eisner didn't even admit that it was racist, and has even discussed how Ebony has a slave mentality. It's just bad. It's just bad. bad. And at number 2, Barbara Gordon as Oracle. Although Barbara Gordon has an origin story about how the daughter of GCPD Commissioner James Gordon became a vigilante and a member of the Bat family, the more controversial origin story of hers is when she became Oracle. Barbara has been kicking around since 1967 when she first appeared in Detective Comics issue 359, but it wasn't until 1989 that she took up the mantle of Oracle after she was paralyzed by the Joker in Batman the Killing Joke. That is where the controversy lies. The character was unnecessarily shot and crippled by the Joker and implied to be sexually assaulted as well, as a means to prove a point to Batman and screw with James Gordon. She was a mere plot device. According to Alan Moore, who penned the story and has since expressed regret concerning the treatment of Barbara in it, editor Len Wein has been quoted as saying, "Yeah, okay, cripple the when Moore had asked about approval for the story arc." Speaking of things that are incredibly offensive, that brings us to our final number on our list. In at number 1, Tyrock. Tyrock is one of DC's first black superheroes, which is definitely something to be admired, except for the fact that most of his stories, including his origin, were incredibly racially insensitive. Tyrock, whose name means Scream of the Devil in his native language apparently, was a member of the Legion of Superheroes who has a reality warping scream. The character, created by Cary Bates and Mike Grell, was a racial separatist. Instead of just having the character be a hero who just so happened to be black, they made a big deal about his race. Tyrock hails from a fictional island called Marzal, which is filled with former African slaves who hate the Legion of Superheroes. They're segregated on the island. And when the Legion visits the island, Tyrock tells them, I quote, "Racial prejudice died out long centuries ago, but perhaps the Legion is behind the times." That was in the 1940s, people. That is some f***ed up stuff coming from white writers and white editors at DC. On top of that, co-creator Mike Grell was rumored to have hated having to create Tyrock, so he deliberately made him look ridiculous. I quote, "I gave him a silly costume. It was somewhere between Elvis's Las Vegas costume and something you would imagine a pimp on the street corner wearing."
In at number 10, Doctor Strange. Dr. Stephen Strange was once a world-renowned surgeon. With such a high-ranking position in his field, many viewed him to be a bit of an egotistical jerk from time to time. In a freak car accident that nearly took his life, the doctor woke up in a hospital bed with his hands floating in casts before his very eyes. His entire profession depended on just how steady his hands were, and now with such terrible nerve damage, he would never be able to operate on patients ever again. You can imagine the psychological toll that this would play on your brain, having your entire livelihood ripped away from you after one accident. Luckily, in his search for a cure, which just seemed like a pipe dream at the time, he soon found himself in the Himalayas. After meeting the Ancient One and undergoing rigorous training, he was finally able to let go of the pain that this accident had caused him. In at number 9, Superman. We all know the story of Superman, but the majority of people gloss over just how tragic this origin truly is. Perhaps it's because after his ship crash landed on Earth, he was raised by such a wholesome family that fostered him and his alien powers. When you really think about it though, his home planet had exploded, which completely wiped everyone that loved him. A whole world full of people just like him was now gone. He now has the awful task of being raised in a world where he is the obvious outcast. Imagine finding out that you were adopted and then discovering that you're this mysterious alien. It's hard enough to discover your own life's purpose, but for Clark Kent, most of the time he would be dealing with split personalities his entire life. He has to be both Clark Kent, the average human, while simultaneously exploring his powers to rid the planet of evil. In at number 8, Daredevil. As the story goes in the first issue of the 1964 Daredevil series, a young Matt Murdock is walking home from school when in the distance he sees trouble brewing for an elderly man. Little did the man know, a truck was heading in his direction and death was knocking at his door. Not on Matt's watch though. In a heroic act, the teenager throws himself in front to save this elderly man. In the process of doing such a selfless act though, his eyes are sprayed with these radioactive chemicals. The man was saved, Matt survived, but the chemicals had left him permanently blind. Nothing says tragic like a teenager with his whole life in front of him being told by a doctor that he would be blind for life. Luckily, this is the comic book world, so he was able to spin this into a strength and become the superhero that we know and love as Daredevil. However, in any other world, this story of a hero sacrificing himself for the betterment of others is inherently a tragic tale. In at number 7, Spider-Man. The majority of these tragic stories begin with the hero having no powers, for which a tragic occurrence then leads to them either discovering or developing them. For Peter Parker, he had already been bitten by a radioactive spider that gifted him with his new powers. Although, with his newfound powers, he believed that this was his way to make some money in show business. However, with this distraction now in his life, it pulled him away from being at home to watch over his elderly Aunt May and Uncle Ben. As fate would have it, an intruder burst into the home, attempting to rob the place, only to fire a single fatal shot at Uncle Ben. Peter largely blamed Uncle Ben's death on himself for being too late to save him, even tossing his Spider-Man attire into a closet, wishing that he had never left. This is a tragic story not only because Peter takes the full blame of this freak occurrence, but it soon fills him with vengeance, which is not a great way to start a hero's journey. In at number 6, Dr. Manhattan. Born as Jonathan Osterman, the Doctor had lived a very normal life. It's July of 1959, and Dr. Osterman was in love with a woman named Janie Slater. She was a physicist like John, and at 30 years old, he had his whole life in front of him. The two were first introduced to each other by a good friend of John's from college named Wally Weaver. After leaving the Intrinsic Field Laboratory one day with Wally and Janie, John realizes that he left his watch inside. Little did John know was that the Intrinsic Field room was on a timer, and when he entered, the door closed behind him, locking John inside. When he tries to open it, Wally is on the other side and is quickly turning very pale. Wally realized that there was nothing that they could do to save him, and after being blasted by radiation, his colleagues watched helplessly as it essentially just vaporized him. This tragedy could be the origin of when Manhattan really started to separate himself from the rest of humanity. Additionally, he was blamed for the death of his friend Wally, who would pass away from cancer 20 years later. Man, that's tragic.
In at 5, Black Widow. Black Widow has another well-known origin story, one that we might even see play out in the MCU in the near future in the character's solo feature. And it's likely that it'll remain just as dark as it is in the comics. Despite debuting in Tales of Suspense issue 52 in 1964, it wasn't until the 70s that we got more information on the character's past. The character of Ivan Petrovich tells Daredevil in the comics that he was given custody of Natasha by a woman who died immediately afterwards during the Battle of Stalingrad in 1942. He raised her, turning her into a Soviet spy. This was later retconned though, showing Natasha being raised in the USSR's Black Widow Ops program, with Ivan taking her to Department X, where she was brainwashed and trained in the covert Red Room facility, where she's biotechnologically and psychotechnologically enhanced. She's fed false memories in order to keep her brainwashed, and the KGB even arranged a marriage between her and a Soviet test pilot. He's eventually taken away by the KGB for a new program, and Natasha is told that he's dead. Later, when she tries to defect from the Soviet Union, she ends up getting kidnapped, put back in the Red Room, and brainwashed yet again. But luckily, Hawkeye, who at the time she had a romantic relationship with, ends up aiding her and breaking her free from the psychological conditioning, with Natasha later joining the Avengers. In at 4, Sentry. When we first met Sentry in 2000, he was a middle-aged overweight man named Bob Reynolds, who just so happened to remember he's a superhero with the power of 1 million exploding suns, derived from a special serum, although that's been questionably retconned in later years. But despite that one fluid detail, Sentry's first story follows him remembering that he was a hero, and trying to figure out why the rest of the superhero community does not remember that. It's soon revealed that Sentry had voluntarily erased his own memories, working with Mr. Fantastic, Doctor Strange, and a mechanical robot named Clock, in order to make everyone forget. All thanks to Sentry's other more sinister half, Void, a villain of mass power who threatened the Earth, and is one and the same as Sentry. Also, side note, he struggles heavily with addiction to boot. Imagine that, sacrificing your entire memory, your entire life, and making everyone forget who you are, all just to stop the evil that brews within you and threatens to kill all life on Earth. Yeah, that's some terrifying existential stuff right there. And at number 3, the Hulk. We all know that Bruce Banner became the Hulk thanks to being exposed to a gamma bomb, causing him to be affected by gamma radiation. But his origins do go beyond that, especially as far as his rage is concerned. We learned in issue 312 of The Incredible Hulk from 1985 that Bruce was the victim of child abuse. His father was a violent alcoholic who beat him and murdered Bruce's mother, accidentally, but still, murder is murder. In addition to that, his father hated him for his intelligence and would lash out at him irrationally. Then in college, Bruce would get violent back, beating up his father over his mother's grave. So the fact that he becomes the Hulk, someone with uncontrollable anger, thanks to the gamma radiation accident, shouldn't be much of a surprise. The Hulk was always inside of him, but now manifests as his big green other half. In at number 2, Carol Danvers. Carol Danvers has been through some major crap. And she's had multiple origin stories of sorts too. One for becoming Miss Marvel, one when becoming binary, and another prior to when she became Captain Marvel, although the latter two kind of bleed into one another. So when Carol was Miss Marvel and part of the Avengers, there was a storyline in which Marcus, the son of Immortus, a major Avengers villain, shows up and kidnaps Carol, takes her back to his dimension, brainwashes her, rapes her, impregnates her, and then uses her pregnancy for her to give birth to him so he can return to Earth in a physical form. Yeah, that's messed. He grows from child to full man in a matter of moments, then kidnaps Carol again, all of which none of the Avengers bat an eye over. This is not something that went over well with fans, critics, or Carol herself. After some aid from the X-Men and Professor Xavier, Carol comes back and gives the Avengers hell for abandoning her in her time of need. She later becomes binary, where she gets a major cosmic power boost, but later, thanks to more traumatic stuff between her and Rogue, with Rogue absorbing her entire personality, she ditches the X-Men and binary. Eventually, she takes on the Captain Marvel mantle and ends up struggling with alcoholism, something that Tony Stark helps her out of since he once was a past alcoholic himself. All in all, she's gone through quite the journey to become the woman she is today. You can also see why the MCU decided to leave out that rather traumatic Marcus storyline out of the Captain Marvel movie too. And finally, in at number 1, Yellow Jacket. Hank Pym is another character with various different origin stories for his various different personas. It's also worth noting that he struggled with major mental health issues over the years, some of which weren't developed the most empathetically by some writers. Now at the time when Hank's Yellow Jacket persona is revealed, Hank had just created Ultron, and had already had 2 nervous breakdowns in the comics. The most recent being because he realized he was the one responsible for creating one of the Avengers' most deadliest foes. Out of that second nervous breakdown, Yellow Jacket is born, a bombastic, prideful superhero of sorts who claims to have killed Hank Pym, and then kidnaps Janet, to whom he proposes to. Janet, slightly delusional, sees this as a way of getting over Hank, and as a chance to finally be happy. Ouch. Hank eventually reveals that he's Yellow Jacket, and that Yellow Jacket was created thanks to a schizophrenic break of Hank's, along with accidentally spilling some untested chemicals. Hank's problems only get worse from there. But that is a story for a whole other video.